Today's guest on the Homebody podcast is Mollie Birney, who is a clinical life coach in private practice. She works with overthinking, self-aware professionals seeking efficient, authentic transitions and behavioral change. Her coaching style has been described as compassionate, straight talk with therapeutic roots, and draws upon her years as a therapist in a variety of treatment environments as a private consultant and interventionist for families in crisis. These clinical underpinnings are now the foundations of her work as a personal coach for folks looking for a clearer understanding of the mechanics of their mind. I hope you enjoy today's episode, and if you do, hit the like and subscribe button. I am so excited to be joined by Mollie Birney today. Welcome to the Homebody podcast, Mollie.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I'm super excited because today's topic that we are going to be diving into is all about uncertainty. And we were just having a chat before this, and I was saying that I feel like uncertainty is one of those kind of sticky subjects, but also feelings, emotions, states of being that causes a lot of chaos in our own mind. So I'm curious as to how you personally define uncertainty, and why does it feel so unsettling for us as human beings?
Well, it's funny, that there's some debate here as to, is this a feeling or is this a thought? And I personally happen to land in the camp of uncertainty is a thought. Uncertainty is not knowing and having the desire to know, and sometimes can be compounded by shame, which I would argue is sort of a feeling, but the commentary of I'm supposed to know, which is why uncertainty would be experienced by us as a problem.
Yeah. And so that kind of, I want to know, but I can't know, that in itself, like, it doesn't seem objectively like unsettling to us. Like, what do you think the psychology behind that is?
Well, it's always interesting. Anytime I work with a client who will be like, "Oh yeah," and I just didn't know how this would go, and the next client who's like, "I didn't know how it would go, and that was a problem, and I beat myself up over it, and I had to, research to the bottom of the internet to figure it out," rather than having the freedom to not know. And I'm not advocating for ignorance or sticking your head in the sand to avoid knowing, but look, there are some things we're going to be privy to. We get the luxury of knowing, and plenty of things like the future and what someone else thinks about us is kind of none of our business. And so being able to hold those internal boundaries to go, oh, this isn't for me, and I don't have to listen to the noise in my head that says it's supposed to be, or I'm supposed to have figured this out. That's where I see the biggest problem, is like where we end up meeting uncertainty and experiencing shame as a result, like it's a moral failure to be uncertain.
Yeah, and it's such a human response to just day-to-day life is filled with uncertainties, right? We don't know what's going to happen each day. And I think once upon a time, this for me was a really challenging space to live in. And I used to try to plan everything. Like, I used to write out like 5-year plans down to like the minute of what I was going to do, who I was going to talk to, how I was going to interact in these situations. And now I think I live in a space where I kind of embrace that uncertainty. It's exciting to not know what's going to happen, to kind of meet the day as it comes. But for me, it was like this lack of safety in not knowing, right? I couldn't control the outcome. So you kind of mentioned shame, and I brought up the lack of control, but how do you see, like, what are kind of the common emotions that you see surfacing from people who are experiencing this?
Well, everyone responds to that a little bit differently. One person, I don't know, and I'm angry that I don't know. The next person, they're angry, or excuse me, they don't know, and they're ashamed that they don't know. The next person, they don't know, and they decide they're going to go on a quest to figure it out. They may not have any feelings about it, but they're leaping into action. So we all have different responses to this stuff. But you said something earlier that to me is the big giveaway to do we experience uncertainty as a problem, which is it dangerous to us? Because so often the experience of uncertainty is actually a lack of self-trust. Like, I don't know how this is going to go. I can't trust myself to figure it out when I'm in the moment. I better plan this thing so it's bulletproof, or I better figure out or read the future or get the oracle involved somehow, simply because I can't trust myself to know what to do in the moment. Even if you get to the moment and you don't know what to do, great, you ask questions, you draw on your resources. That we always forget how creative and intelligent and resourceful we are in the moment when we actually do need to know.
Yeah.
As opposed to in that moment when we don't know, we don't need to know, but we diagnose it as a problem and ourselves as a problem for not.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really important just then, is that kind of analytical problem solving part of our brain when
Uh-huh.
is kind of our counter. That's what I did. I would try to plan everything to give myself a sense of control. But what does the countering of overthinking really give us in terms of like why it makes sense that we do this, but what is it kind of creating an illusion of is in our lives as well?
Well, even what you're saying, it gives us a sense of control. I would argue it gives us the illusion of control. Because
Yeah.
even when you plan and you think you know how it's going to go, it's still just a damn good hypothesis. We still don't actually know. One of the things I'll say to clients all the time is, great, you tell me the last time you were certain. And they're like, oh, they might rattle off an example. I'm like, is that certainty or is that a pretty good guess? And usually they have to concede, that was a good guess. Recognizing that we are chasing something we've never actually had is a really good, to me, wake up intervention to like, oh, wait, how did I get addicted to the idea of this thing that I've never even tasted? And how
Yeah.
did I get the idea that this would be the relief when I've never actually experienced certainty? And I don't know that we're supposed to necessarily as humans. It's not necessarily part of our human curriculum. In fact, the not knowing, the discovery, and being in that tenuous uncertainty is part of the beauty of what we're doing on the planet.
Yeah, it keeps things spicy in our day-to-day life.
To
And
some degree.
to some degree. But I would like to know what, because I guess we've touched on some terms that maybe feel a little bit ambiguous for people,
Sure.
like a sense of control or even the illusion of control. What does control feel like for you in your day-to-day life?
Control for me in my
Yeah.
day-to-day life. I'm going to have to work backwards here a little bit because because I coach in the mental health space and I coach anxiety and wellness, I'm pretty clear that control is not realistic for me.
Mm.
And so anytime, when I work with anxiety with clients, I consider anxiety from a coaching perspective, which is the attempt to get control over something we have fundamentally no business trying to control. So I don't have the experience of being in control. In fact, most of the time I'm out of control. That doesn't mean I'm dangerous. It doesn't mean I'm a Tasmanian devil. It simply means I'm in relationship with my uncertainty. So the interesting thing is when you talk to someone who is in control or that have worked really hard to be in control, it's usually someone who occurs with a lot of rigidity, a lot of white knuckling, a lot of fear. And the thing about control is once you have it, then you have to keep it. And that's exhausting and totally unsustainable. So
Yeah.
if your question is like, what does control feel like in my day? It doesn't. But my relationship to control is, can I notice when I'm starting to grab for it as though it's really there?
Yeah.
Can I notice when my anxious planning mind or my rumination or obsession starts acting up as though I can manage what you think of me or what's going to happen in the world? And I notice, oh, there's the addiction to control. Can I let go?
Mm. That's really interesting. I have maybe a kind of counter perspective on control because to me, control is kind of made up
Mm-hmm.
of lots of different feelings. So it's our sense of like our capability, capacity to actually rise to the occasion. And you kind of touched on it before in terms of self-trust, right?
Yeah.
How much do I believe that I am capable of handling uncertainties, challenges, things that come up? And so I guess like I look at you, I'm like, you're not out of control. Because if you were, then the opposite would be true. Like you'd be on that spectrum of like rigidity on one side, like everything has to kind of operate in this box for me to stay in a space where I feel safe, or you're in complete like untethered uncertainty and spiraling in anxiety. Whereas control to me is that kind of middle ground where you're able to walk the line and see both of those sides and choose to continue to honor that you could have the capacity to handle challenges. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense how that spectrum is laid out. To me, I like the idea of self-trust more than control because control looks like my internal world controlling the external world, including
Yeah.
your external world, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe that just needs semantics. To me, the self-trust is whatever comes into my internal world or my external world, I'm going to figure out how to navigate that, maybe imperfectly. maybe really messy. Let's find out. But like being willing to be in the dance of not knowing to me as an expression of self-trust rather than an expression of control.
Yeah. And so we're obviously on the path of self-trust now. So when we're talking about trust, we obviously touched on trust in ourselves, but does this also include trust in others, our environment, the larger plan in life? Like, how does this kind of fit into maybe managing anxiety that comes with the unknown? That what is that trust component in terms of, I guess my question is, where do people lose a lot of self-trust who are experiencing anxiety in the unknown, first and foremost?
Where do they lose self-trust?
Yeah.
Often if they're in the results of like, this needs to work out in a particular way and it looks like it's not going that way, well, now I have to abandon self-trust and go to, in my mind, the control, what I would call control. Like I have to get the result, rather than if you're actually operating from self-trust, even if you're not getting the result, you're committed to the process of trusting myself. I don't know what results this will yield. One of the distinctions I use with clients sometimes is hope is that it's going to work out, and hope it is attached to particular results. Like you'll know it's worked out when you have the $1 million or you got the raise or whatever it is that you think you're supposed to get. Faith is, and this is where we're moving into a vaguely spiritual conversation, although sometimes that's dangerous territory. Faith to me is it's already worked out. And what the results look like are none of my business, which allows me a lot more space, a lot less clinging to the results, and a lot more commitment to the practice of self-trust and working with things as they come. But I think mental health and spiritual health are hand in hand. So if we're looking at a larger conversation of like, what's my relationship to the universe? Anxiety is a severing in that relationship. Anxiety is like, I'm not in relationship with the universe. It's all on me. Or in some cases, I am the universe. To hell with the rest of the universe. It's just me. So I think there's something to be said for what you're pointing to here about allowing ourselves to be in self-trust and allow for us to be in relationship with the larger world around us, that our self-trust can extend to that. That doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to work out or that everyone's going to be nice to us or we're going to get what we need, but that we're taking the curriculum. That's sort of how I think of it. We deal with our lives. We're taking the curriculum of our lives. And I do trust that the curriculum that's coming is the right curriculum, even if it's not what I want.
Yeah. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow. I think, like, I like the idea of, do you think hope or faith is more related to self-trust?
Faith to me would be more related to self-trust. I mean, when I say also self, there's a sense of like, are we talking about the little self or like the meat suit or the larger self that from which I am sourced, or I don't, now again, we're in difficult territory here, but I would say faith.
Yeah. And I think that is true because there is a level of uncertainty that comes with taking that leap of faith, of trusting that you have the capability to rise to challenges that you haven't risen to before, right?
That's right.
So we're kind of like cross-referencing and checking, oh, I have gone through XYZ challenges in my life. This isn't exactly the same, but I'm pretty sure that I could kind of move through this because I have done something similar before. But there is a leap of faith that has to occur within that too, because we haven't done the exact same thing. And
yes.
So I like that. I like that a lot. Something that really resonated with me when I was studying psychology was the locus of control. And I think they changed the name of it now. They don't like that term, but I like the term. And so you can either have like an internal or external locus of control or be somewhere in the middle. And this really kind of comes to the like outcomes and how we perceive these outcomes. So to me, if you have like a lot of self-trust, you have this internal locus of control, right? Like you could actually see the outcome happening and you can go, I impacted this to create this outcome. But the things that didn't work out, you don't make them mean anything about you, right? You don't go, well, this was because I'm a bad person or I didn't work hard enough or XYZ. You kind of take it as it is. You see the process occurring and you accept the results and you take that as like a learning curve essentially to move on to the next one. For an external locus of control, it's like everything's happening to me and I have no control over the outcome. So why even try in the first place, right? So I'm not going to go for that promotion because my boss has something in for me and they're not going to give it to me. So I'm not even going to apply, right? So completely like outside of yourself. And so I think that process of like building self-trust is something that comes up time and time again in like all mental health work, essentially, because it is this fracturing of our sense of self-trust. Do I do what I say, mean what I say, and like actually believe that there's going to be an outcome as a result of that? What is your kind of like process when building self-trust with clients?
I talk a lot about this idea of betting on ourselves, which to me is something that should be taught to us in high school.
Yeah.
How do we risk trusting in our enoughness? And that doesn't mean betting that you're going to be able to knock it out of the park the first time. But even betting on yourself could look like, man, I'm probably not going to knock it out of the park. But when I don't, I'm going to figure out what resources and support and conversations and education I need so that I can going forward. I like trusting ourselves to find what we need. I remember the first time I thought about this concretely. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was making the pivot from therapist to coach. I'd been licensed and then was moving to an unlicensed conversation. And my now husband and I were debating, do we change apartments, which it was a more expensive apartment. And I remember the awareness of, can I bet on myself to be able to pay this rent? Making this particular gutsy move, which was like throw my hat over the wall and then have to go chase it, right? And I remember the fear that that came with and how many conversations I had to have with people about, hey, listen, if this doesn't fulfill in this way, here's what I will do. Here's what I can try. Here are the conversations I can have. And that betting on ourselves, I say this to clients all the time, it's a muscle. It's going to feel terrifying and weak the first several times. And in fact, if you're out to prove that you can't bet on yourself, that the first time you do it and it doesn't fulfill, your survival system's like, see, I couldn't do it. I knew it all along. We have to remember, the first time you do a rep of anything, it's going to feel feeble and fragile and all that. But that's how I talk about it with clients. Like it's a learned skill we're developing here. Because it is self-trust. Some of us come in with it, but plenty of us, we really need to learn it because we've grown up in environments that has depleted it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is another common theme is that all of these things that maybe we feel like we have a deficit in. So, oh, I don't trust myself, or I don't have confidence, or I'm not feeling XYZ. These are all things and adaptations that we can learn, and through repetition and consistency of practicing, like betting on ourselves. What is like one small bet that people can make on themselves to start to build self-trust? And this is in obviously a very general sense of the process, because we're not talking to just one individual. But if someone was like, I'm lacking in self-trust and I just want to start small, how can they start to bet on themselves each day?
Well, one of the ideas that comes to mind, and this may sound silly, but like trusting ourselves to have an unscripted conversation with a stranger. Am I going to know what to say? Am I going to have anything helpful to say? Now, you and I being in this work probably are more content having a conversation with anyone. There's a little more space and it's a well-developed muscle. But what I'll say to a client sometimes is the next Uber you get in, you have to ask them about their day. You have to ask them about their job. You have to be the most curious person possible in the interest of being of service, not just I'm picking your brain because this is my selfish exercise. You have to tolerate my barrage of questions, but like allow your curiosity to be of service to someone else. And let's trust that the next question can come. Not that you're racking your brain for questions, but that you let your curiosity about them guide you. You let what you're interested in or the awareness that's happening in the conversation inform you of like, wait, I want to know more about that. Or wait, I'm interested in that. Allowing yourself to show up awkwardly or in whatever way is totally organic to you. That's a silly, tiny little bet that we can make daily of, can I introduce conversation with this person and bet that we're both going to walk away a little more space, a little more light in our faces.
I like that. I like that a lot, because when I was starting out on not just my business, but well before my business, when I was anxious and depressed, I started to put myself in situations because I basically didn't have the muscle where I could talk to anyone, right? I was very insulated. And so I would ask, like, maybe it was the cashier or the service person, like, how's your day going? And I just started off with that one question, like, how's your day going? And most of the time they might respond like, good, or just a single. And then I would get stuck and be like, I don't have anything else to like say right now. But just started practicing that. And some people would just open up as a result of it, and they'd tell you all about their day and, oh, nobody's asked me this question. Like, I've been serving people for 6 hours. And you realize through those positive engagements that this is easy. Like, it gets to be easy because when you're asking questions that elicit the positive responses, like you can bet that there's always going to be a positive or neutral reaction. Like, most people aren't going to be like, don't go away for asking me how my day is, right? So you can kind of like create a bit of safety around it. But I just did this all of the time just to kind of build that muscle to start to talk. So it's exactly what I didn't even think about it like in the scheme of things, but it was essentially what you're saying, that I was practicing on a day in, day out basis to kind of put myself in those situations, to kind of start to teach myself that it is accessible and it is safe to do these things, and that are positive outcomes even amidst the uncertainty that can come with them. So
that's right.
I'm interested if someone is like in the midst of like trying to make a decision and it's completely uncertain, they're feeling a little bit out of control and just chaotic. What are some of your favorite go-to techniques for helping people to open up their kind of capacity to be in that state of indecision or uncertainty that can help them kind of move forward with the choice at hand?
Sure. Well, if we're talking about like, how do I make a choice? Yeah. Usually what keeps us in indecision, we'll point to, oh, I'm not certain. But what we're really not certain of is, how do I avoid loss in either of these decisions? That's what we're weighing out. Like, which of these decisions has the least amount of loss involved? And what we have to remember is that any commitment we make involves loss. I commit to this person, I'm saying no to these others, unless you're in a polyamorous relationship. I commit to this job, or I commit to pouring myself into this project. I'm neglecting these others for the time being. That loss is built into commitment. So realigning ourselves to, oh, right, if I'm on planet Earth, if I'm in the meat suit, if I'm taking this curriculum, I better develop a relationship with loss. And rather than weighing these out by like, which has the least amount of loss, we take a look at, what do I feel hungry for? What do I feel called to? And oftentimes for people who are afraid of uncertainty or stuck in indecision, we are so in our heads that we're not even hearing the intuition. We're not even hearing the itch of like, oh, I feel hungry for more of this. We're trying to make our decision purely from a cerebral place. And I got to tell you, the body has to be involved. The somatic feedback is relevant, and we have to be interested in what our body and energy has to say. I have this energy in my chest and this feels overwhelming, or I get really excited every time this possibility comes up. We got to stop weighing out the loss and start leaning into the somatic intuition and how we respond to some of these moments.
What are some of your kind of nudges that you've felt from your body? Like, what are some of those sensations that are like a yes for you?
It's funny, when my coach, he's been my coach for 20 years, said to me when I was a young therapist, he goes, Mollie, are you done pretending to be a therapist? Are you ready to be a coach? And my head was like, no, absolutely not. Coaches have no credibility. And I'm saying this to my coach, of course. But so my intellect was a firm no, but my body, like I'm pretty sure I made some, like I might have even stood up, like in excitement, like no, but my body was a firm yes. I like that incongruence. And often our heads and our hearts are in conflict about this sort of thing. And it's clear I let my body make this decision, because here I am years later, I'm a coach.
So 2 things. Why do you think our head and our body are in like conflict often when it comes to just like everyday life and decision making? Like, we do have that tension constantly. I think one thing, but I feel a different thing, and that causes tension. And I've forgotten my other question right now, but it'll come back to me. So let's start with that. Why do you think there is an incongruence that occurs between our head and our heart?
This is a wonderful question. I think because, especially in the Western model, the Western approach, I think we have been trained to be really suspicious of the heart. And we have these overdeveloped thinking minds, problem-solving minds, these really active prefrontal cortex. It's a problem-solving machine we have up here, which means that anything we turn it towards, whether it's a bowl of cereal or a job decision, becomes a problem we have to solve. So we have this problem-solving machine that in the Western model is supposed to then manage the intuition machine, which we've decided, that's the heart, which we've decided is dangerous. So I think there's a setup there that you better be able to manage the heart with the head and be suspicious of any information you get from the heart. This is why most of the clients I work with, they identify as kind of compulsive overthinkers, overachievers, perfectionists. If I'm asking them about their intuition, they're like, what are you talking? What is this muscle? What is this nonsense? And I relate. As an overthinker and perfectionist myself, I too dismiss the validity of intuition and it's too woo-woo and I don't know. Well, come from my own experience, I have something else to say about this. And I've guided enough people through the process of letting the penny drop from their head to the heart. That doesn't mean that we abandon our thinking mind, but we want to develop the muscle of the wise heart so we can actually hear what intuition has to say.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like you said, our society is so geared towards what is rational, logical, what can we problem solve, how can we analyze this situation. But everything I think about humans is kind of like counter to that. Like we do things that are irrational and illogical and risky and all of these things in order to get to that next level. And I think this is where, like, do you think that in your lifetime and in your experiences that your body is more often than not correct in what it desires, even when it's in incongruence with your brain, let's say?
I think even the idea that there is a correct desire and an incorrect desire, even the framing of it, it's like, look, my language betrays my beliefs all the time. So we're in step here. But yeah, I think you mean like, can we trust
true.
in the
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's generally a fair bet with some exceptions. And again, I think of the majority of the clients I work with, they're operating from the Western model of I can think my way through this. I have to plan my life. I have to think my way through my decision making and my creative expression and what I think is possible for me. So do I think the heart has a whole lot more information about that? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think that's valid? Completely. But if we don't know how to listen to that, if we don't know how to tune to that frequency, for lack of a better word, it doesn't matter how true it is. We, A, can't hear it, B, don't think it exists to begin with. So yes, I think it's truer, but the leap with the overthinking individual is getting them to believe in something that they may have been dissociated from.
Yeah, you actually have to turn up the volume first to hear what is happening in order to start to listen to it. And yeah, I think you're right. Correct was not the right terminology, but I think most of the big feelings that I've had in my life, like meeting my husband for the first time. And afterwards, I called my best friend and I was like, I'm going to marry this man. I'd met him for half an hour and it wasn't a logical thing. I felt this move, the same as like your body moving forward with like moving towards coaching, but your brain saying like, this isn't like a logical step to take in your career, right? Like I just felt, and that was a scary leap of faith to go, well, I'm going to follow this intuition that I actually like, because up until this point, I was like, I don't believe in love at first sight. I don't believe in like, there's only one person for you. I don't believe in any of those things. So up until this point, I hadn't felt this feeling. And then this just came in and shattered like all of my preconceived beliefs, thought patterns, notions about this thing. And I think when I think back through all of the big experiences in my life, it has been my body that's been saying like, yes, giving me that nudge or push to go in that direction. But I think there is a fine line that comes to it, because like following that nudge all of the time puts you in a fairly like hedonistic space as well, because we're just doing as we feel all the time, even though there may be ramifications or consequences to those things that we need to launch.
Yeah, I'm saying we don't want to abandon our critical thinking. This is my challenge with the positive thinking movement, is that too often it's positive thinking which lacks critical thinking, and we want both. We want access to both. This is why we have a prefrontal cortex. It's not so we can be in some hedonistic expression of our lives, which, by the way, wouldn't be very compassionate anyway. So yeah, allowing a little more balance there is really valuable.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you kind of touched on a little bit earlier about having like community and support and people that you reflected with when you were going through a big change in your life and making a big decision to make a change in your career. How important is a sense of community or belonging or relationships with other
My
people?
lord. I don't have to tell you. I could. This is hyperbolic. So freaking painfully important. And I say painfully because we often are like humbled by how much we need our community, but it's essential. And I want to give an example of that, which is that too often we are going to ourselves, or rather our thinking minds and our prefrontal cortex here, to see what's possible for us. And when I can think of a handful of clients who are like, if I want to know what's possible for them, I'm not going to them. They're going to undersell themselves. I'm going to their partner. I'm going to their boss. I'm going to their fiance or their kid that thinks the world of them, or their therapist or their mentor that fully believes in them. That we are often not credible authorities. We do not see ourselves clearly. That doesn't mean that's really different from hearing our internal intuition. I'm talking about, do you look in the mirror and say, like, I'm capable of this? Oftentimes we're going to undercut ourselves every time. So community is essential for accurate reflection because, frankly, I don't know about you, but if my head is up my ass in shame and fear, forgive me, I'm just going to be crass here. I want another perspective. I don't want to be right about all the limiting beliefs that I have when I'm in that particular position. I want to go to people who can see me clearly. So I think that's an essential component for so many reasons, but especially that for the overthinking and uncertain community. I think that's a big deal.
I couldn't agree more. And you said something that I had to write down because it just resonated. You'll be humbled by how much we need our community. Like, I think that really hit me when I had my daughter. So she's almost 9 months now. And up until that
Congrats.
point, like, thank you very much. I've been like, I'm fairly independent, and even though I logically and rationally know that we need community and connection and all of these things, it wasn't until that point that I was like, oh, we're interdependent humans, right? We thrive off these connections. We do need communities. We do need social structures around us. We do need people that mirror and reflect to say, like, hey, you're doing a good job, or this is really hard, or can I take the load for you, or whatever it is. Not just in decision making, but in just day-to-day life, being able to know that that network stands around you is extremely humbling when you are so used to being independent and tackling all these challenges by yourself. Because for me, that was like, no, I don't need anyone else, until this point where I was like, oh, I very much need community, right? Have you had a moment like that in your life?
Motherhood was absolutely a point like that for me, where I had so much identity around my independence and how quickly I could navigate the world, and discovering that real freedom is the ability to be independent where appropriate and dependent where appropriate. That and yes, interdependence, of course, but there's a role for dependence. And when I had my kid, we did a home birth during COVID, and he's now 4.5. And I remember having to reach out. No one could come to the house, but I needed to be on the phone with people a lot. And I remember saying to my sister at the time, because is this too much? Am I calling too much? And she's like, oh, baby, no, you keep it coming. The freedom to be dependent, I don't think is something that the Western model appreciates. We only appreciate the independence. And of course, interdependence we can name, but we don't get interdependence without having the ability to be dependent in a moment where you need to be. So I think there's a redefining there that we need, in the same way that, like, freedom isn't being loyal all the time. It's being loyal where it's appropriate and disloyal where appropriate, or generous where you feel called to be generous, and the freedom to be withholding where appropriate. Otherwise, your generosity doesn't mean anything. So it doesn't mean anything to be independent all the time if you also don't have the ability to be dependent when you need to.
Yeah. And that's so powerful and such a vulnerable space to sit within, right? To be dependent on someone else is like a surrendering to it's faith again. Like, it all comes back to this self-trust that it's okay for me to surrender to someone else, to be supported, to be held in the space of, to be guided by, to listen to other people, because I trust that I myself are going to move through this state as well. And I think, what you said is very powerful about that need for dependence. I think got demonized a few. I remember when attachment styles were very, very big, especially on social media. And attachment styles have their place, and it's a good tool to kind of understand and navigate the way in which we connect with ourselves and other people, and how we may have been brought up. But I think there was a amplification of people moving away from this dependency, like as in we as humans shouldn't be dependent, and it is almost an icky thing to be dependent on other people. Now, obviously, there's a sliding scale. Like, you don't want to have hyper dependency on someone else for all of the things in your life. But there is very much a symbiotic relationship within human beings and social structures and communities in which that dependence and interdependence and independence, you're constantly like cycling through these different phases. And I think if you thwart that process and you take away your ability to be dependent on someone else, you're also taking away the ability of other people to support you and to be able to be a part of your environment and your network and your relationships and connections. So you're kind of like severing yourself off from other people and connection in and of itself. And so I think that's very detrimental in the long game of things for us to not practice that vulnerability of sitting independence that you brought up.
Yeah, well, it really sets up this construct of I need to be ashamed of my need.
Yes.
My need is, here we go again, my need is a problem to solve. My need is a moral failure of some sort, rather than, sorry, my need is part of the curriculum I'm in right now. As a new mother, how dare I assume that I'm going to be as independent and hypermobile as I was before? We don't get access to that. How arrogant of me to assume that. And to try and maintain who I was before as though I wasn't totally appropriate to be transformed by this experience, you know?
Yeah. I love that because it is very arrogant. Like, but you're also just so naive going into something like motherhood as well. Like,
Yeah.
you have
Oh, yeah.
no idea what you, especially like, and this is my first child, like you have no idea. You have an idea of what
That's
you
right.
think it's going to be like, but what it is actually like is just so vastly different from anything that you could ever prepare for. And that uncertainty, and all throughout my pregnancy, I was constantly kind of like leaning into the mantra of just surrendering, because like each day was different and new pains and new movements and new feelings, and the fear slash uncertainty slash excitement of becoming a mother was something that I didn't know how to almost feel about, because you just don't know what it's going to feel like to become a mother. And so I think that is yeah, it's, you do go in with this kind of air of arrogance of, I'm going to be a parent like this, and it's going to end up, there's going to be this thing. And it just, that's just not true. Like, it's just never going to
That's right.
happen like that. And being
That's
able
right.
to be vulnerable and dependent, especially on the people around you, allows you to find that new way of being and move from maiden to mother in a way that is so transformative, instead of trying to stick to that rigidity of control because you can't handle the uncertainty that comes with it.
Again, there's
Yeah.
that. We always think, when we feel out of control, we try and get back to something we recognize, which is why we have this, again, this Western cultural fascination with get back to my high school weight or my high school jeans or my high school productivity or my pre-COVID energy or my pre-divorce finance, whatever it is, that we only want to go back to the most recent point rather than, no, we got to create from exactly the circumstances we have right now.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. But I think we've had a beautiful kind of full circle moment in this conversation. So to wrap things up, is there any other guidance, support, and wisdom that you want to drop just for someone who is still feeling maybe shame or fear around
Um,
their need to control or create certainty that maybe is uncertain at the moment?
I always like curiosity. And curiosity here would sound like, is it possible the uncertainty isn't dangerous? Is it possible? Now, here's the thing for an overthinker. Don't go answering that question, because then as your prefrontal cortex is engaged and you're trying to think your way through it, no, it's none of our business what the answer to the question is. I want you asking it, because that curiosity can only come from an intuitive heart. It's not your brain asking that question anyway. Like, technically, sure, your brain's involved in that process, but asking a question like, is it possible? Can I make room for the possibility that this uncertainty isn't dangerous? And then, can I sit in the inquiry?
Like
That's the
that.
practice. It
I
ain't going
like
to
that.
solve anything, but it gives us somewhere to start and somewhere to go.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today, Molly. It's been a
My
pleasure to chat
pleasure.
with you. Um, how can people find you, and what is the best way to get to know your work and get in contact with you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Mollie Birney. It's Mollie with an IE. And you can go to molliebirney.com and you can check out workshops and individual work and all that.
Amazing. I'm going to put all of your details in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to go and get in contact with Mollie and explore her work more, then you will have all the details there as well. But thank you so much for your time today, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Truly my pleasure. Take good care, Anna.
Yay!